You have to find those moments that are authentic to really not just tell, but show organizations and teams that, hey, you're not just dispensing advice or giving, suggestions. You yourself are taking them. And I find it's even more powerful when you have those examples that you can display to an organization versus just having some really nice things to say, no matter how meaningful they are, when you can say, hey, I'm taking my own guidance.
Scott, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Good to see you this morning.
Yeah, I love the energy, man.
Thanks, man.
If people could hear our crazy conversations beforehand.
That's the interesting part. We should let them do that.
No, we should.
The outtakes.
No,
There's nothing like an outtake.
Yeah, or for anyone that's watching the show right now, what we were saying is we should superimpose Scott a paddle so it looks like he's in a canoe on the screen coming into the show. So let us know in the comments whether you that's a good idea as well. But Scott, before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and your journey to the role now at Calm.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you for having me. Hey, everybody. My name's Scott Domann. I'm the Chief People Officer at Calm. And I've been at Calm for about 4 years. And prior to that, I've always been in HR roles. Started off in learning and org development. Went to places like Facebook and Netflix in more senior HR roles and have been at Calm for the past 4 years. I live in Los Angeles, and I'm really thrilled to be here today talking about mental health in general, and mental health at work is is luckily my job and my passion. So really thrilled to be talking about this today.
I love the two new top, by the way, and I feel like I need some Calm merch.
I think I know who to call. This is our Pride Calm t-shirt.
Yeah, it's cool.
LGBTQ mental health is health. We've got a lot of really great calm stuff, and we actually have these really cute Calm onesies. So if you have children in the future, know anybody, we have these really cute little Calm onesies that they can stay in and stuff like that. So big fan of all the branded stuff.
Yeah. Why am I not surprised that Calm's got the best swag? Like I've only met you for 10 minutes and I already know that Calm's got great swag as well. I could just tell. I'm like, yeah, okay. If you're going to do this, let's do it properly.
Oh yeah. Let's do it proper. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. What is it that, obviously you mentioned some of the companies that you worked at before, very different cultures. I'm sure. What was it that attracted you to the role at Calm?
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking at, my career and thinking about what I've done. And I think about all of the places that I've worked and the people that I've worked with. And when I think about the things that have impacted people the most, and whether it be stress, anxiety, burnout around product launches or sales or things like that, it really comes down to the core of mental health. And so when I first met Alex and Michael, who are our co-founders, talking to them about, mental health as the crisis that we're facing in the world today and the thing that we all want to solve, and it ranging from how you sleep better at night to the mental health challenges that are more from a clinical standpoint that people are faced with, of being able to make that something that I can talk about on a day in and day out basis and try and really infuse in the workforce at Calm, but then also think about the benefit that it provides to the place where we spend the most of our time and our brain space, which is at work, and where and how I could be part of the solution to the mental health crisis that's facing us today. And in my own small way, be able to talk to other organizations around how they create mentally healthy workforces, how you focus on and invest in managers. I just felt like it was one of those things where you meet two amazing people like Alex and Michael and really think about what they've built and then think about, gosh, I could do that all day long. Really just, it's been a magical 4 years. So it's just one of those things that I'm kind of continuously proud of, and it's what drew me here and what keeps me here.
Amazing. When it's something truly powerful, like you mentioned, happens when you connect purpose with your profession and the impact, right? You're like, wait a minute, I get to do this every day. This is my job.
Yeah.
And it's having a real meaningful, because most people, and I did this for the first 10 years of my career, you kind of walk through life, and when you hear that question of, what is your purpose? You're like, oh, what is my purpose? Well, what is that impact that I'm having on the world? And at a certain point in your career, I don't know if you found, obviously I think like clearly you did find this, that it's beyond the job title, it's beyond the money even, it's beyond the many
really
things.
is.
It's like, hey, okay, now I'm at a point in my career, and don't get me wrong, it's a luxury for many people that financially you can make that decision as well, that I actually want to focus on something that's really aligned with my values and my purpose.
Yeah, I totally agree. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest of the US and didn't know anyone who did this job. And so I feel really lucky that sort of, as I got towards the final years of college, I was able to find this as a discipline and went to grad school for it, and didn't even know how much impact I could make or how much impact could be made with people in this profession. And so it's one of those things that I always feel really lucky that I was able to discover and find truly one of those things that from a passion of mine, I'm like, wow, again, not just mental health, but I get to get up and think about how you invest in people, how you build a business, and the interaction of the people with their organization and the sort of things that you can do to help it grow and thrive, and the things you have to be able to spot so that you don't create toxicity or make the ecosystem sick. Those are things that I think about all day. And it's just really, really fun to be able to say, gosh, from going not even realizing that this was a profession I could be in to something that I'm incredibly happy doing, just feels, I feel grateful every day. It's just one of those things you'll probably hear me talk a lot about. It's just this leading with gratitude and just sort of like continuously pinch myself about, wow, I get to do that.
Not only do you get to do it, but think about how far we've come and how much the profession's evolved. We were not
Oh
talking
yeah.
about well-being when I started in, I've been doing this for 20 years, and personal relations days, right? That long ago, we wasn't talking about well-being at work. Back then, that wasn't really high on the agenda.
Not at all. I
So
was Scott from personnel
yeah,
at my first
exactly.
company.
Personnel,
And,
exactly. Yeah.
I joke about that where I was just like, oh, that's interesting. Okay.
It's so
um,
different.
it's so different now. And really it's just, how much the profession has grown. And, say your exact point of like well-being and mental health at work, many of us were professionally raised that you didn't necessarily touch on those topics at work. You guided people towards benefits or encouraged them to, find the help they needed outside of work. But engaging in a mental health conversation, even tangentially, is not something many of us were raised to do professionally. So I think about that a lot when I'm working with some of our customers, where it's like, hey, let's talk about the things that you've had embedded in you over the years and what it means to you, and where even you're uncomfortable talking about mental health at work. And I can give you some of those things to help you as an HR leader individually think about how you can really open up that conversation and what that looks like. Because yeah, this discipline and profession in my 20 plus years as well has come a really long way. And thinking about where we were, sort of very early 2000, gosh, it's pretty significant.
Yeah, and even HR professionals themselves not talking about their own mental health. So I know many that are
Yeah.
listening, and we've had conversations in private. It's been a crazy few years,
Oh my
especially
gosh.
especially the last couple of years, like 3 or 4 years, right?
Yeah.
And many of us, many HR leaders need to also practice what they preach. So we always hear sort of the put your own oxygen mask on first,
Yeah.
because who does HR go to when they're struggling?
Exactly. And it's a very doctor heal thyself type of profession as well, where we can give a lot of advice, but I find myself every now and then being like, okay, you need to take your own advice.
Mm.
Um, and, I'll just give you an example. We had an employee pass away last week, and someone that I'd been friends with and worked with at two companies. And I was like, I tell everyone it's okay to not be okay. And I have to take
Mm.
that advice myself. So it was good that, to have that in the back of my head. I'd be like, you can't just give this advice. You have to practice this advice yourself. And I found it really a good opportunity to just tell people that it's like, hey, not okay right now. I'm going to cancel these couple of meetings, be back online tomorrow, but it's okay to feel this way. And it's okay to do these things. And I find that like, not just in an HR profession, but also from a senior leadership standpoint, you have to find those moments that are authentic, to really not just tell, but show organizations and teams that, hey, you're not just dispensing advice or giving, suggestions. You yourself are taking them.
Yeah.
And I find it's even more powerful when you have those examples that you can display to an organization versus just having some really nice things to say, no matter how meaningful they are, when you can say, hey, I'm taking my own guidance.
Yeah,
There's something really powerful about that.
and the cool thing about that is, it it the vulnerability is a strength. A lot of people see that as a
Yeah,
weakness, but you realize actually it's a superpower and brings
absolutely.
you closer to your team. But also, I've got to the point with my team, and I love them, that they'll call me out on my bullshit, as well, and say, Chris,
Yep.
you keep telling us but you're not doing it right. You're not showing up. You're showing up tired.
Yeah.
You're showing up stressed, and I'm like, okay, so we've got to the point where we can have that kind of conversation, which is really nice.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yeah. Mine does the same. Mine does the same. I encourage everyone to take time off. I'm like, take your vacation time. Then when's yours? I'm like, no, I'm fine. Like
yeah,
I go on like one big vacation a year. I'm fine. I don't need to take little days off here and there. And, it's just one of those things where you have to kind of pause and be like, I'm fortunate enough to sit in this seat. And I actually, again, into the notion of like show, not tell, I have to show you that like I'm taking time off, that I'm doing these things that I encourage everyone else to do. And it's, it's really wonderful to have people around you that'll be like, all right, BS, come on. And you're like,
yeah,
yeah, you're right. Okay. Thanks for calling me out.
yeah,
'Cause we all need that. We all need that
100%.
all the time.
This leads us quite nicely to your 2024 Voice of the Workplace report, because
Yeah.
part of that, one of the things that kind of struck me was one of the parts that said managers are the problem and the solution. Could
That's
you
right.
delve into that a little bit? We kind of just touched on some of that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is something that, I believe Gallup had said, oh gosh, 10 plus years ago, that all of us talk a lot about now, which is, people will leave managers. They very rarely leave their team, the brand, company, etc., but they'll leave a manager. They'll also stay for a manager in terms of, I'm here for you. I love working with you. You invest in me. And so you see the pros and cons of, of management, and the cause and solution of the issues that managers can both facilitate in terms of, here's how you create a really healthy environment, which I'll talk about here in a second. And the things that managers do where, if it's conscious or unconscious, that can really drag individuals and a team down. And I think about some of these things that I always encourage organizations to do, which is one, recognize that no one was born into managing. Like I always, when I talk to people who are managing for the first time, I always tell them like, hey, do you want to hear about all the stuff I've gotten right over the years? Or do you want to hear about the stuff I messed up early in my career? And they're like, oh, tell us about the stuff you messed up. Because I messed a lot of stuff up when I was a first time manager.
Yeah.
And I think, again, from like to your point on the vulnerability of just being able to say, yeah, I messed all this stuff up, and I'd love it if I could help you in even some small way avoid the magnitude or the issue that I stumbled into. And I think it's really powerful to do that, because
some of those?
No one was. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. I remember this. It was like not realizing simple things like cross-cultural, meaning US to other country, time zones, ways of working, ways of communicating, the power of just showing up and not just being on an email or I don't even remember what the tool was. It wasn't Zoom back then. We'll just call it WebEx or something. How you actually recognize the power of the words you use, and when you engage different individuals in different environments, the space that you have to leave for people to answer or to feel comfortable with you, and even offering what could be in their version a really tough piece of feedback, but for people that are from the US or from different culture, company cultures of, oh, that wasn't direct enough, I missed it. Like listening for the cues and things like that, man, if you don't listen for those simple things or take the time to show up or take the time to really seek to understand, you can miss so many things, and then build your operating model on that, and then realize how wildly divergent you are from what your team was actually saying, what they actually needed, and things like that. Like just those examples of, me really, really messing it up and going down paths that I was like, I'm definitely on the right path. And then finding out sort of the hard way, like, I'm definitely not on the right path. And luckily having people around me to course correct. And, to also say, like, having mentors around me that some of those powerful things I've had from someone who's still my mentor is just stop it. And I was just like spinning on these things about teams and projects and work and stress. And he was like, just stop it. No one else is thinking about this. You are going way into your own head and down a rabbit hole that if you're not careful, you will not be able to recover from.
Yeah.
Pull back, and it was one of those things that I always remind myself. And so that's where I tell people leaders, I'm like, there's simple things you can do, like being empathetic. All you have to do sometimes, and we talk about this a lot at Calm, which is, how are you doing? No, really, how are you doing? Because if I say, hey, Chris, how's it going? And you're like, I'm fine, man. I'm like, great, man. And we just keep going. And you might not be fine.
Yeah.
And you're like, I'm fine, man. I'm like, no, really, how are you doing? Like, we started a little late today. Da-da. you know, this. Or you might just totally be fine. You're like, I'm actually really good, but I really appreciate that you asked me a little bit more than just the surface level. And that way you can build just in those simple tools the ability to give someone the space to say, like, yeah, I'm actually not okay today. Or, hey, I actually am okay, but when I'm not, I at least know you're someone who will bother to ask, and then I can come to you with it. And then you sort of build on that with like how frequently you check in, how you go about, knowing the difference between checking in and micromanaging. I'm always a fan of telling people, I'm like, listen, I won't be over your shoulder tapping you going, oh, I want it red, not blue. I want to make sure I understand like where you need me, where you don't need me, where you say, hey, Scott, I've got you to focus on that thing over there, move that rock. I've got this thing over here. And just knowing that as more frequently that you check in and the more you learn how to, you know, have the how you work together, it's really important to do that. Like we talked about with like, going on PTO and things like that, making sure that you're leading with that and saying, hey, everybody, I'm taking this Friday off. I'm going to be offline. My husband and I are going to go do this. And that way you're doing it and saying like, hey, I'm offline, to the extent of someone is saying like, hey, I've got the same thing, or I've got to leave at 3 o'clock to go to the kids' play. You recognize and respect that. So it's just like, hey, I'm going to give you that space and that time because we're giving it to each other. And then really just thinking about the way that the overall organization invests in managers. And again, like I said earlier, knowing that no one is born into managing, no one knows
No.
automatically how to do it. And really the grace that new managers need, where it's just like, hey, I know you're excited. And I know you want to prove to me that you're like, I got this. At some point, you won't got this. And it's okay. Come to me as your boss, go to your HR partner, go to someone that you trust in the organization as a mentor and say, I don't got it and I need some extra help. And it's in that vulnerability and time and the coaching that really I'd like to think, at least a much better manager than I was 15 years ago. And being able to say, gosh, I'm really glad I had those stumbling blocks pretty early on so that I could say, I stumbled and I fell down and I had people pick me up and dust me off and I learned a lot of stuff. And the tools and resources that companies provide are really critical too. And just more examples of that, I think about a 360 I got when I first started managing, where I learned a lot about how I communicated and things that I needed to be conscious of. And when I validated it with friends,
To hear, though, is it?
oh my gosh, I would do a lot of things I didn't realize, and I validated it with friends. And I remember going on a hike and asked my friend Tim, I was like, I got this feedback, and isn't that funny? And he's like, you do that all the time.
What? Why did you tell me that before?
I was like, what are you talking about, man? And it was just like, oh, I've got a lot to work on.
Yeah. Well, so in the some of the stats in the report were pretty shocking though. Like the fact that only 50% of managers feel confident to have a well-being conversation.
That's right. That's right.
Most shocking.
It's pretty shocking, and I would say honestly, it's probably less than that. When you think about,
to be honest, I was surprised it was 50.
Yeah,
so to your point.
And this is all self-report, so that's where I'll talk to other organizations. I was like, listen, 50% of managers told us they were comfortable with a well-being conversation. And think about the managers you have. Do you think that 50% of them are actually even know what your well-being strategy is, what well-being means in the organization, how to facilitate well-being, how to create an environment of well-being within their teams? And they're like, not a lot. And I'm like, great. Well, that just gives you an indication that, the more you talk about what well-being means, and it's the repetition, the tools and resources, the ability to practice. And then I always look at this as the cohorts of managers that you put together so that they can support from and learn from each other. You've really got to be deliberate about it, because not only are people not organically just sort of pop out and they're like ready to manage the first time, but as an organization, you can't just expect them to do it by osmosis and being like, oh, I heard about that manager training or performance management or well-being once. You really have to make it this repetition.
Culture.
Yeah, it's got to be woven into the culture. And it's one of those things that I always talk about, whether it's well-being or mental health as well. You've got to take the taboo out of talking about it and make it okay to talk about well-being at work. And oftentimes when I talk to other organizations, it centers on things like sleep. Because if you ask a group of like 100 people in a room, like, hey, who's had a mental health challenge this month? Maybe you have a couple of people who are confident enough to say, I have. But if you say, hey, who could have slept better this month? You
Mm.
probably have a lot of people going, I could have slept better this month.
Yeah.
And then you use those things as an entry point for your organization to really say, hey, here's tools that you can have. Here's the benefit of a good night's sleep. Here's how you're more effective. Here's what your good night's sleep lends itself to the well-being and mental health of both yourself, your team, and the environment you create. You can find all of those avenues to do that. And so, every company and every people leader really needs to think about really truly how comfortable are managers talking about mental health and well-being, and how you just need to assume that, hey, I've got to give everybody a baseline and some fundamental language to use
That's
when
a good
talking
point,
about these
though. To
topics.
double click on that is the fact that that's I want to double click on that because it's so important
Yeah.
that to have the language.
Yeah.
It's because so many people are worried about, can I say that? Is
Yeah.
that the right way to say
Exactly.
it? Like, so then they don't say anything because they're so worried
Exactly.
around, am I going to offend someone? Am I going to say the wrong thing? Kind of also similar, you see a similar thing with the DEI conversation where
That's
people are
right.
just worried about saying the wrong thing, or, and so they don't say nothing. And that's the problem. One of the things that worked really well, I got invited
Agreed.
into a company. I don't think I can mention their name, but they're a very large global brand that you would all know. And one of their CHRO reached out to me and said, "Hey, Chris, I'm having a real problem with the stigma internally talking about mental health. Any ideas?" And I was like, "Okay." Well, firstly, I'm flattered that you called me. But so what we ended up doing is a little mini kind of weekly series where each week I interviewed one of the executive team about their mental health and well-being journey,
That's great.
and it was like 10-minute videos that we recorded, similar now in the TV studio, but virtually. They're in their own home, and we had a very diverse range of leaders. Actually, thankfully, in that company, and it was a game changer. Like,
That's
one
amazing.
one of the executives was a single female mom, and she was talking about how she's really struggling
Yeah.
to show up as a mum and look after her own mental health whilst trying to be as part of the executive team. And people were like, wow, okay, like we just saw you as a high flying super energy. No one could see the challenge. And it was a similar story throughout the entire executive, and we released it as a weekly series, and we put it on like
Yeah.
uh the intranet internally, etc. And they were like, the engagement was insane because they heard from all of our executives like, oh wow, we're not the only ones, right? So you also got to
Yeah.
make it sometimes it's simple things like that. Like, it doesn't have to be super
Agreed.
complicated. Yeah.
Agreed. And it's one of those things, like, to that exact point, I talk about the importance of storytelling.
Mm.
Like I said, like, tell the story of you as a first time manager. And, I avoided some of the specifics because I know a lot of people still at the company. But it's, those kinds of things of like, tell the specifics of your story. Make it okay to go like, gosh, that senior exec that I look up to, or that, wow, it's just a member of the C suite that I don't even know, is comfortable enough to talk about whatever challenge they've been facing. It's okay for me. And, particularly when we think about all of the issues that just as individuals we face, that just to have an example modeled by your senior team is incredibly powerful. Um,
Yeah.
and it's as simple as storytelling. And, this is where I also tell a lot of other CHROs, be careful with the word vulnerability. Because as we all love Brene Brown and the studies of vulnerability and things like that, if you go to a group of execs that, aren't quite ready, they're like, oh, I'm not going to be vulnerable. It's not for
Well,
me.
the funny
And
thing
that's where
is
it's,
because I asked them and it wasn't coming from HR, they all said yes.
uh,
So we like, because that was one of the problems that she had. She's like, I've asked them, if they said no, but if we can position this as a series that Chris Rainey's doing around mental health and well-being, and we changed the
yeah,
narrative a little bit, they were like, yeah, sure. And I did, what I said is, are you happy to share your story?
yeah,
I led with, and they were like, sure. Whereas if I said, hey, can you share specifically,
exactly.
where you've had challenges, mental health, etc., they would have been like, no, I'm not doing that.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where the words matter, my friend. And that's where it's just like, creating that environment of storytelling, of people to feel confident and comfortable. And frankly, like, exactly what you did is, and this is true for execs or managers or your earliest career people, is meet people where they are. And, think about the cultural context of the company or where they're from, of just like mental health as a topic may not even be things that are actively discussed, where in the sense of you're well or you're not well, and things like that, and in ways that are quite negative. So it's the think about all of those things for those of us in a people and HR function of we can have the fanciest words for things, but oftentimes like an employee or an exec, it's just not in their vocabulary. And so we need to meet people where they are to make sure that these well-being strategies or mental health topics or focus on these things are actually things that are used by the broadest sense of your organization.
One other thing I want to talk about as well, which I don't think is spoken about enough and it's becoming more and more of a challenge, is the conversation around financial well-being.
Yes.
Because I think it's becoming more and more of a challenge. The cost of living versus inflation. They're just not matching up right now, right?
Yeah.
We're seeing the increase of salaries not really getting flatter, and the cost of living getting higher, and it's a challenge for many people out there. And I know that's something that Calm's helping trying to address as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And our Voice of the Workplace report, that was the number one stressor on people is financial well-being. And thinking about, from a financial well-being standpoint, there are organizations that we partner with. If, for instance, a company called North Star Money, that's about financial well-being for the 100%. So that it's no matter what type of job you're in or the environment you're in or how much you make or don't make, that financial well-being is for you because of the stressors that are associated with inflation on cost of goods, the value, the cost of eggs and milk and things like
Everyday
that.
things, yeah.
All the way through to, people I talk to that like, well, the kids are going to college here in X number of years. So here's what we have to start thinking of and doing now. And wow, I can't believe I have to think about this, or in environments like London or like when I live in, where I live in LA. The cost of kindergarten. Like I don't have children, but I'm just like, well. it's just unbelievable.
It's a whole, for me and Tasha, it was like a whole of one of our salaries. Basically, it's like 50% of our income going on to childcare.
Yes, unbelievable. And so it's just like I think about those things, and I'm like, wow. I mean, the financial pressures facing everyone in every circumstance today is just, the thing that every organization needs to think about, and how you actually pair that with mental wellness and mental health strategies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and again, this going back to managers, this is a brand new thing.
Yeah.
This is another thing on top of our managers that when I became a manager wasn't a conversation, wasn't a part of your responsibility. Again, that we're putting on the shoulders of our leaders and managers to have these conversations, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about when I was first starting to work. I mean, I had a really great boss in my first company, but if I had a challenge, it was like, well, I hope you get your stuff done. And wouldn't have talked about mental health challenges or financial challenges or things like that. That was all outside of, the four walls of work. And that's, again, going back to the topic of where I think about how people were professionally raised in our discipline of like, hey, you have to think about those things that you weren't afforded, but are expected now, especially like Voice of the Workplace report, thinking about the generational requirements of people who are entering the workforce now. It's expected that you'll talk about mental health or financial wellness, so that you'll provide the tools and resources. And candidly, just because I didn't get them doesn't mean you can't learn about them. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't provide them, because they're expected these days.
Yeah, they're no longer nice to have. And I think the number that shocked me was when I read that 52% of employees are looking for additional income outside of their job.
That's right.
52% of our employees are looking for additional ways to make money outside of their jobs. So you can just imagine the stress.
That's right.
That's causing.
Yeah, exactly. It's no longer, as people would talk about, their side hustle. It's sort of, their full-time role, and then the extra work that they do to make ends meet or to send the kids to school it's very real for so many people.
Yeah. And then the other one was, 59% of those have linked that as their main source of anxiety and worry.
Yeah.
As well. So that really puts it into context.
Yeah. And particularly thinking about, what companies are, going through today from their financial hardships and stress and reductions in force or reorganizations, and everyone sort of, even if you haven't been impacted by that, continuously worrying that, well, I'm next. And so you have to think about that. And I always tell our managers at Calm every time we go through a change, and coach other companies on this as well, is you have to answer the what about me question. And, when you're going through those things, think about employees sitting behind their computer and in all hands going like, I'm hearing what you're saying about this change or this product or that, reduction in force, but all I can think about, what does this mean to me? How does this impact me? How does this impact my pay? Am I next? I'm in this discipline. Will you start turning your eye towards this now? And really thinking about as an organization how you lead from that particular, how you lead from that place. Like as you're going through change, how you think about that question, start by answering that question. If you're like, well, if I get this question from an employee that's really about them, you can't ignore it. And you've got to be able to answer it. And so the more time and effort you put into it, really figuring out what the answers to those questions are, the more effective change will be. But at the same time, everyone's carrying that in spades these days
Yeah.
and really have to think about what that means.
One of the things that came out of the report, which I don't think people talk about enough and was quite eye-opening for me, was around the need for women to have more mental health support during different life stages. And I just don't think that's something that many people think about.
Yeah,
I didn't even, it was a new thing for me to be exposed to. And I think it's so important that we talk about that. Could you share your thoughts on it as
absolutely.
well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, women's health challenges are, just a range of topics. And I'll give one example. It's very personal to me. My sister went through breast cancer treatment through most of 23. And so we spent a lot of time on, would go and drive her around and things like that, but it was primarily about her mental health. And in terms of just as a woman going through breast cancer, getting, some fantastic medical care, but really the way she, as sick as she felt, my mother was her primary caregiver at that time, really in terms of not wanting to hear things like that may be very common that you and I have heard as like, you got it, girl, you can do this. She was like, I don't want to hear that. I don't have this and I don't want to anyone to say that to me. And so I was like, great. I want to know what you need to hear. Are there, TV programs I can put in front of you that are, bring you a little bit of joy? She was in a clinical trial at the hospital she went to and having a bit of anxiety. I was like, ask for all the drugs. And she was like, oh, I didn't know I could. And I was like, you've got to do that. You are in a clinical trial. They will give you what you need for the anxiety that you have going through some of these tests. And so it just really made me, not just from thinking about Voice of the Workplace report, where we have to understand women's healthcare needs, but the advocacy that is required. And so, personally, I've just become a stronger women's health advocate, just going through that with my sister. And then also thinking about from a company standpoint, everything ranging from, family forming to infertility to loss of pregnancy to menopause to, anything that women are facing, to be able, even as a man, to be able to say, I may not personally be going through this, but I've taken the time to understand the range of topics and creating a space that you can come to me and say, here's what I'm facing. And then as an organization or just as someone who's lending an ear, to understand and truly go deeper in terms of being able to provide the support mentally in terms of like, I'm here for you, I'm listening, and or from a company standpoint to see what you can do that actually provides more substantive support for the challenges that women are facing today.
Yeah. No, I love that you brought that up because I did a podcast a few weeks ago with Teresa Protzer. She's the former chief people officer of Tesco, and she also went through breast cancer treatment. And she literally reached out to me saying, "Hey, I'd love to come on the show. I need to share my story because just people aren't doing." And this is reflected in your report that the majority of women who are dealing with these issues don't feel comfortable sharing these experiences.
That's right.
With their manager, with their workplace. They just keep it to themselves.
That's right.
And Teresa realized that, and we did a podcast about her journey, and
Yeah.
Many of them found solace in Facebook groups and
Yeah.
other avenues because they didn't feel comfortable talking about it in their own workplace.
Yeah.
And that was quite shocking to hear that that they don't feel comfortable to speak to their own manager or their company when
Yeah,
when they're
exactly.
in such a tough time. And it's quite sad to hear that
Yeah.
as well. So all of these things. Like you mentioned, menopause was another one that's come up a few times more recently on the show. So we're beginning to have more of these conversations that we didn't before. And again, it's also helping people, like you said earlier, have the language to have the conversations as well.
That's right.
Again, it's such an important part of it. But through storytelling, there's nothing more powerful than people telling their stories, which is why Teresa was like, "Hey, Chris, I really want to share my story."
That's really amazing.
If it can help even a few people,
Exactly.
it's worth doing, right?
Exactly. And as my sister and I would talk about, like the need for everyone, particularly with men, to be women's healthcare advocates. We can't just sit there and say, oh gosh, that's a woman's problem for women to speak to. She really pushed me on like, you have to talk to these, about these topics at work. You have to talk to your benefits brokers in the US about how you can provide more proactive support at work for women's health care issues in general. And so it's just made me just a staunch advocate where I find myself apologizing, but in some ways where I'm like, hey, sorry if I'm talking about something, you're like, why is he talking about that? But here's the story of what I went through with my sister and why I feel so passionately about this. And in terms of wanting you to make sure you advocate for yourself and that, you've got an advocate in me.
Yeah.
And it just takes one of us. And it just, really you're one story away from understanding another human being, a culture, a need, things like that. And the more you tell those stories and the more we talk about all of these things, the more support and actual change we'll be able to see in terms of these topics.
Yeah. Listen, I could talk to you forever, but I know I've got to let you go at some point.
Yeah, let's just keep going.
No, I'm
having a good time. So, we just we'll clip through it.
No. What, when you think about the future, what are you most excited about as you look forward? Because we spoke about a lot of challenges and, but I want to end on a positive in terms of what you're most excited about moving forward, what you're most passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to, what I love about being at Calm, which I get most passionate about thinking about how we talk about mental health in general. And that how we talk about, really much like I think about all the diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging topics that early in my career, I was talking to someone about this the other night. I remember when we still taught tolerance and, those kinds of things where it's like, I can't believe that we talked about those things and how far, we've progressed in terms of what DEIB truly means as an imperative in our everyday life and also at work. I think about mental health very similarly, where it's companies like Calm are able to thrive and everything in the mental health space because mental health is a primary topic that people are living with right now and actually discussing. And a lot of times I'll talk to just whether it's leaders or organizations around, is this just something that came up during the pandemic because we were all at home? And like, no, mental health is health, and mental health has always been something that people have faced. And the pandemic just happened to, pull the curtain open on a lot of these topics and say, there are a lot of things we have to see. There are a lot of things that may have been right in front of us that people were facing all along. And could have been as simple as anxiety and burnout, where you need to give someone the grace and space to, work on themselves or take time off to be able to rest. That, these kinds of topics of mental health at work and taking the taboo out of talking about mental health at work is so important. I'm so excited about that. Like when we look at our Voice of the Workplace report and being able to talk about financial stress, technology, women's health, Gen Z issues, I'm just glad that those are things we're actively and proactively engaging in so that we're not waiting to crisis points. Crisis points will come, and organizations and individuals have the support ideally that they need for those crisis points. But it's in the proactive, sort of always on around talking about mental health and well-being that I'm just really excited that we're in the middle of right now. And I only anticipate that it's going to, get even more significant. You
made a really good point there as well. It's like many organizations, when I look at their support, it's always reactive, not proactive. So I want to highlight that because we have to be way more proactive in what we're doing in the services that we provide. And as you mentioned, we only covered a tiny fraction of the report. So definitely the sort of the always on technology sort of burnout side. So people check that part out. There's also, as you mentioned, around the Gen Z, which was area in terms of them struggling the most, but they are also leading the charge and the change as well. As you mentioned before, like this is no longer nice to have. This is an expectation. And they're really leading the way.
Absolutely.
On that side. So for everyone listening, you can, wherever you're listening or watching right now, there'll be a link to the report below in the description. But Scott, I appreciate you coming on. I love your energy. Clearly you're in the right space, man, in the right company.
I appreciate it.
Aligned. I
think so. I'm happy. So I really thank you for having me on today, and thank you everyone for listening, because these topics, if you take nothing else, it's like mental health is health. And, whatever you're doing and thinking about in your personal life, for the people around you and at work, make sure that you create the space for people's mental health conversations, and that you provide, particularly for organizations, exactly as you said, the proactive, always on mechanisms that allow people to have, what they need when they need it, and you're not just waiting till those crisis points to provide that support.
Amazing, man. Well, listen, I wish you all the best until we next speak. I appreciate you coming on.
You too, sir. Have a good one. I'll see you soon.
See ya.